Hello everyone, my name is Kassie and welcome to day 11 of INKtoberfest. I hope you've been having a lot of fun. Today we're going to be playing with Reinkers and painting. Watercolor is one of my favorite things to do with Reinkers, and the Color Hive Reinkers are perfect for this technique because they are water reactive. So I have in front of me a beautiful rainbow of colors from the Color Hive line. So let's take a look at what colors I have. We have Telephone Box, Flamingo, Red Leicester, Yellowstone, Cotswold Green, Blue Raspberry, Vegas Strip, Sugar Plum, Flat White, and Fog. You don't need all of these colors, and you can definitely mix colors to make your own colors, and we'll be doing some of that today. But this is a good basic rainbow to get you started. But whatever reinker colors you have, go ahead and grab them, and let's do some painting. So what else will you need today? I'm working on a porcelain plate. I'm going to use this as my mixing tray, and this is nothing fancy. I honestly go to the dollar store and look for white porcelain plates, and that's what I use. So that's what I have for my mixing palette. I'm also going to be using some paintbrushes, a cup of clean water, some watercolor paper, the Color Hive Fog ink pad. We're using this to stamp our image, and of course our stamp set. I'm using the Maker Forte You Are Berry Sweet stamp set, and I'll be using the main berry image to color today. Now that we've gone over our supplies, I'm going to clear off my desk so we can get started. We're going to start by stamping our image first. Now I like to use a MISTI for this because stamping on watercolor paper can be a bit tricky because of the texture. So I'm just placing my watercolor paper in the corner of my MISTI, and I'm going to arrange my berry stamp a little bit off-center on my panel. I'm then going to pick up the stamp on the lid of my MISTI and ink it up with the Fog ink pad. Now this is a light gray ink, but it's a little bit darker than I want because I want to go with a no-line coloring. So this first generation stamp I'm going to put aside, and I can color that later, and I'm going to grab a second piece of watercolor paper. Without re-inking, I'm going to press the stamp down again. This will give me a very faint image. It's hard to see on camera, but you can see when the light hits it just right that the image is there. So the second generation stamp is the one that I'm going to use for today's project. I'm very quickly going to heat it with a heat gun. This will help make sure that the ink is completely dry before we start adding colors. I'm heating it from both the top and the bottom. This will help prevent warping. Now let's set aside our stamped image for a minute while we set up our palette. I'm working on a fairly large plate because I like plenty of room to mix, and you'll see why in a minute when all the colors start mixing on my palette. So I'm starting with some Yellowstone, and I'm going to put that in the corner over here. Now I want to make a green for my leaves, so I'm going to grab my Vegas strip and add a little bit of blue right next to my yellow. I'm not going to mix them together right now, I'm just going to let them be. We'll be mixing them in a minute. In another corner, I'm going to be adding some Telephone Box. This will be for our berries. The final color we need is something for the branch, so I'm starting with some Flat White, which is a light brown color. I'm keeping my ink dots far apart right now because the colors will start migrating on my palette, and I want to give them space for that. To make my brown a little bit darker, I'm going to throw in a little bit of Sugar Plum too. The inks right out of the bottle are very, very concentrated, so to make them a little bit easier to work with, we're going to add some water. So I just have a little pipette, and I'm just adding a drop or two of clean water into each one of my ink puddles. You can see them start moving around now. This is why I gave myself plenty of room on my palette between the colors. So I'm not even going to have to mix my green. It is mixing itself for me up in that corner, and I'm just going to let it do its thing. So I'm going to turn this around so you can see what I'm doing on this. The advantage of making your own green and not mixing the colors, just letting them be together on the palette like this, is you get a lot more variations of green that you can choose from when you're painting. So when I dip into different parts of my puddle, I'm going to have different greens. You can see right up next to that edge, I have a very yellow green. Further back into the middle of my palette, I have a very blue green. And since all of these greens are made with the same two colors, the blue and the yellow, they are all going to look beautiful together and be very harmonious. When you're doing this, I suggest you grab a scratch piece of paper and make a few swatches from different parts of your puddle so you know what options you have, because it's going to look different on the palette than it does on your paper because it's so concentrated on your palette. So play around with what mixes you have so you know where you can go to get the different colors that you want. Now that our green is ready, let's go ahead and get started. When I'm starting on a leaf, I like to look for where the darkest part of the leaf is going to be and add my color in there first. Before we start, I'm going to grab my towel. This towel I use to dab my paintbrush when it's wet to make sure there isn't too much water on my brush. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up some green. I'm starting with a little bit of a yellow green, and I'm finding where my shadow is, where that darkest part, and I'm laying the color in there first. I'm starting a little bit light. I can always build more color up, but I'm just kind of getting a feel for what these inks are doing right now. So I added a little bit of the blue-green into that shadow. I'm pulling that out, and I'm just dipping into different colors in that green puddle each time I load up my brush. This gives some beautiful variation to the leaves. Another thing that I like to do is add a little bit of different color into the leaves. So for this, I'm going to use some red because I'm going to be using red with my berries later, and that will help keep the leaves and the berries looking like they belong together in the same picture. I'm not adding very much, just a tiny bit to the very tip and maybe a little bit into the shadows. It's always better to go with less and build up color. I'm going to let these colors settle a little bit now, and I'm going to move on to another leaf. Now I'm moving to a leaf that's not touching my first leaf because I don't want two wet areas touching each other or the colors are going to run together. So I'm doing the same thing I did with the first leaf. I'm grabbing a color from my green and spreading that around. And then I'll be dipping into my green in different areas to pull in different colors. I'm keeping my style really loose today. I'm not worrying about filling every single inch of my leaf with color, leaving a few white gaps, some little imperfections. I think it adds to the character of the overall piece. I'm also pulling in just a little bit of purple now to add to my leaves. I love adding the different colors in, and since I have a very limited palette, as long as I stick with just these colors, it will all work together. And adding in that little bit of purple adds a lot of depth to the shadows. I'm going to continue working my way through all the leaves, doing the exact same thing, picking up different variations of the greens and a few of the other colors to pull into them. Don't worry about trying to make each of your leaves look the same or have the same amount of each color in it or whatever. Let each leaf have its own character and be perfectly imperfect. You'll notice with this leaf, it's a very muted green. The reason that happened is I had a dirty brush, and so there's too much red, and when you mix red and green together, you get a muddy color. But it's okay, it's going to be just fine. I'm going to let it dry, and then I will bring in some vivid brightness to it later. Whenever you have a leaf that is folded like this leaf is, treat each section of the leaf as its own leaf. So I'm coloring the under part of the leaf right now. I'm making sure I have a nice dark shadow going along the fold line. I'll come back and color the top of the leaf after that part of the leaf has had a chance to dry. After getting a lot of the leaves painted, I've noticed that the very first leaf that I painted was a little bit too light. So I'm going in with a second layer of color. And that's absolutely fine. You can build color as much as you want. I'm also going back to that one leaf that was really muddy and muted, and I'm adding some straight yellow into that. That will help give it a nice vibrant glow. Now that I have my leaves painted, let's go ahead and take a closer look at them. I love the different color variations, and I love how they don't have to be perfect to still look amazing. The next thing we're going to paint are the branches. And to do this, we're going to use that brown and purple mix that I had up in that other corner. Let me pull it down so you can see it. So I'm kind of mixing it together, letting them mix and move. They've already mixed in with the red a little bit, but I want to get different variations of the color, just like I did with the green. I'm going to test it on my swatch card to see what I have. And right now that purple is a little bit too strong. So I'm going to add in a little bit more of the flat white. This is a very light color, so it takes a little bit more of this color. But you can add just a little bit more, one drop at a time, and then test it again and see if you're getting the color that you want. So I'll go ahead and make another quick swatch. This is the brown right out of the bottle. It's very light. So pulling from a different section in my puddle. I'm even going to mix in a little bit of the blue-green just to see if I can get that brown that I want. Normally people want you to stay away from the muddy colors, but it's a stick. And so you want a stick color, and sticks are kind of a muddy, dirty color. So mixing in a bunch of colors together is going to give you a very interesting brown. While I'm mixing my brown more than I mixed my green, I am making sure to leave different areas of the puddle as different colors so I can continue pulling different colors to keep that variation. So now I have a lot of different browns to choose from as I go and paint my branches, and I can just keep pulling from different parts of the puddle, just like I did with the leaves. I'm actually going to turn my palette around so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and load up my brush with some brown and just start pulling in those branches. And I'm starting at the base of the leaves with a nice dark color and pulling that into the base to the rest of the branch. Again, I'm not worried about being perfect and filling in every square centimeter of this branch with color. I'm just getting that color loosely in there. And I'll continue pulling in various colors and shades of that brown to create the rest of the branch. Now that we have the branch colored, we can go ahead and add in our berries. Now I'm going to be using this crazy mess of purples, reds, browns, and even some of the blue-greens, and I'm going to create the berries with that. I'm going to dip in the same way that I did the leaves, just pulling different colors. But this time I'm going to zoom in so that you can take a closer look at what I'm doing with my paintbrush. So I'm loading up with some of the red, and I'm going to try and keep the brighter red berries in the front with the darker muted colored berries further back to create some depth. I'm going to start with one of the front berries and the brightest red that I have on my palette. I'm just going to brush in the color and fill in the space. Again, I'm not trying to get it perfect. I'm letting some of the white show. This makes it look like little highlights on the berries. But I'm not thinking too hard about it or anything. Down at the bottom of the berry, I'm adding in a little bit of purple or a little bit of green just to add a little bit of shadow. As I move further back, I'm going to have more muted berries, but this was a little bit more muted than I wanted to be. So I grabbed some of the brighter red and I'm mixing that in on top. I'm going to continue jumping around with the berries and just adding in the different shades of reds, adding in a little bit of purple, a little bit of green, sometimes even a little bit of yellow to give some beautiful variation to the berries. I've kept this part of the berry painting real time so you can see about how long it takes me to paint each berry, but I'm going to speed it up now just so you don't get bored watching me. Adding some splatters can be a fun way to take away the pressure of it being a perfect painting or any mistakes that you may have made. So I'm going to take some water and mix that with the ink to make a nice juicy red that I'm just going to tap my paintbrush over the paper to get some nice beautiful speckles. At this point, when I have all of my colors in, I'm stepping back and looking to see where I need more contrast. And I'm mixing up some darker colors, mixing in some muddy colors to try and get some really good shadows. And I can see that underneath this berry cluster here, I don't have enough definition between the berry and the leaf, so I'm adding in some good shadow. Don't be afraid to go dark in your shadows. Some good contrast will really make the difference in your painting. I'm adding in another shadow over here underneath this berry and underneath that berry, just wherever I don't have enough contrast to really see what the different shapes are. At this point, I'm going to add just a hint of a center line or a center vein into each of the leaves. And that, my friends, is how you can use your Color Hive Reinkers to paint. Isn't it fun? I hope you have enjoyed today's video. Be sure to check back tomorrow for more Inktoberfest fun, and I hope you have a wonderful and creative day.